Welcome to another episode of the FXL podcast, where we explore the complexities of M&A in the field services industry. And today, we're diving into maybe one of the most crucial yet challenging phases of any merger or acquisition, that is integration. You know what I'm talking about. Imagine building a bridge between two islands. And the goal isn't just to make the bridge look sturdy from the outside, but really you want to ensure that it holds up when people start crossing. I think that's important. But if the foundation isn't aligned, and if the material don't fit together perfectly, that bridge will eventually collapse. No matter how well it appears at first glance. And I think this is a good analogy to think about when it comes to M&A integration. It's not enough to just acquire a business that looks great on paper. The real success lies in how well you connect the two organizations beneath the surface. And we're going to explore what it takes to really lay that foundation for a successful integration and take the CEO perspective on integration, from aligning the leadership vision to navigating cultural differences and addressing a lot of the hidden risks in operation integration and process integration and operating models, and really consider every piece that needs to come together to ensure both operational efficiency and long-term growth. And joining me today is my co-host Gyner, Ozgul, who will walk us through how a platform company can prepare for integration and avoid some of the most common pitfalls, and really ultimately build a bridge that delivers on the value creation plan. Gyner, welcome to another episode. I'm excited to dive in.
I'm excited to dive in as well. Hey, I got a question for you though. First, before we start,
Go ahead.
like, what time is it where you're at?
Hey, I just woke up. I took a cold shower, and it's 6 a.m. in the morning. But I am always pumped, high energy, pumped up whenever I get to talk to you because I learn a lot. So
Yeah.
this is a
Hey,
free master, a free MBA for me.
yeah. So to our audience, to show my co-host's level of commitment here, he's always up at like 4, 5, 6 in the morning, his time doing these with us. So uh, just so you guys
I,
know.
no, look, when it's something I get excited about waking up to. Believe it or not, um, working two different time zones, having a global company, working with partners all over the world, gets you and working with a lot of the leading field service companies. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm also very grateful for. I know you've been. It's been a big week for you, board meetings and everything. So thank you for always making the time for us, Geener.
No problem. No problem. I
So,
always enjoy our conversations. You see.
well, I hope that's always the case because we've got a lot more coming and planned. So, Geener, when I say integration, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? What's the first picture that comes to your mind, good or bad?
Um, People come to mind.
What
Um,
what what about people?
all businesses are centered around people, right?
Hmm.
The people that are in your business today and the people that you're acquiring, right? And
Hmm.
I'm not even talking about the customers for a second. It's just you got two organizations with two cultures that have some common threads,
Hmm.
enough so you thought that these two coming together would be some expansion of value to your customers, but the people are like, that's what pops into my head, like the people of those two groups, and how do you harmonize bringing the people together?
Yeah, that's interesting. And there was a post on LinkedIn the other day, talking about how everyone thinks about system integration and process integration and all of that, but they really think maybe they don't prioritize thinking about the people
Yeah.
integration, and they just assume that people will just follow, and sometimes they forget that actually people are the ones that drive the process, and people follow leaders, not systems and processes.
Yeah, so here's what I'll say. If someone gave you an empty notebook,
Hmm.
right, and said, here's an empty notebook, just
Hmm.
walked up to you and gave you a pen and an empty notebook,
Hmm.
you're going to just start writing things, whatever they are,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But if someone gives you a novel or a book to read, it's
Hmm.
all written there, right?
Hmm.
The analogy I'm trying to express is we forget how important the communication and the change management is to the people in each organization quite often. And we're
Mm.
doing more the white notebook. So people
Wow.
start writing their own story, like
Mm.
making assumptions, wrong ones most of the time,
Mm.
as opposed to giving them the book. Like, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. Let's have communication
Mm.
about it. Let's talk about it. What are your concerns
Mm.
about it?
Mm.
That whole step of bringing people in and helping them
Mm.
understand, writing, giving them a book that's written versus an empty notebook. We have a lot of work to do. And
Yeah.
by the way, admittingly, I make that mistake too, right? I just like
Yeah.
it's just an observation.
Yeah, I've been recently doing a lot of reading on business process management, enterprise architecture, and I came across an organization called the APQC, the American Productivity and Quality Council, I believe. I hope I'm not butchering it. And they have like a tenet to process excellence or process management, and at the heart of it is change management.
Yeah.
Um, and they talk about engagement and change management, and they're really talking about the emotional connection that employees feel toward the organization that really influences their behavior and performance. um, and and how do organizations use how do you build trust, how do you set behavior, how do you link employees work to the overall organizational goals and performance, because you can have the best process architecture and all the documentation and all of that, but at the end of the day people are up, especially in our industry, service industry, people are going to run these processes. So if they're not engaged, if we're not communicating, and most importantly if we're not providing the training, if we don't have a safe culture, and have a system of reward and recognition,
Yeah.
it really all falls apart. So it's really a very different look at change management. Even though we're talking about process excellence, still change management is at the heart of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why when you ask the question, what do I think about? I think about people.
Mm. Well, not surprising to me coming from a servant leader such as yourself. So, but I guess for in the broader picture, talking about harmonization, architecture, and all, talking about enterprise architecture
Yeah.
and how a lot of companies, they tend to grow and become multi-billion-dollar companies, but then there is no blueprint to all the people, process, systems, data, and how they interact together.
Yeah.
And you would think it would be crazy to build a skyscraper, let alone skyscraper, a single family house, and not have like the house architecture, right, where all the piping and all the doors and the layout and the electric and how it all works together, right? You wouldn't build a house without having a map, some sort of an architecture. But yet businesses, right, because grow to thousands and tens of thousands of employees, but yet they don't have an architecture that it's like a visual representation of the interaction of all the elements in the business. And one of the books I'm reading is called Enterprise Architecture as a Strategy. Yes, enterprise architecture, it comes from primarily the IT world, but really this talks more about the integration of business capability and IT and the people,
Yeah.
and how it all comes together. And they talk about target operating model. Like before you even, and I found it very relevant for companies such as ours that we work with and our partners in private equity, because when you're doing acquisition and integration, you're effectively integrating the architecture of two businesses. Well, in your case, 30 plus businesses,
A lot.
you're architecting together, uh, but a lot of folks don't even think about, well, what's the operating model? And when we're talking about an operating model, there is a great matrix that they have where on the y-axis you have the business process integration, and that is to say, how much are we sharing resources, process, systems,
Yeah.
people. And then on the y-axis, you have the business process standardization. which is the level of executing things the same way or differently, right? It's a spectrum, and it's a four quadrant, and you've got unification where we're highly integrated and we're all doing the same thing. You have replication where we're doing the same thing but we're not necessarily sharing a lot of stuff, maybe some but not everything. Versus coordination, which is really we are integrated, we're sharing a lot of stuff, but we're not doing it all the same thing. We're all up, we still have some autonomy in how we run our operation. And then you have the diversification, which is we're doing things differently and we're not sharing a lot of stuff. So how do you think, Gyner, and in your experience as a private equity executive, what's been your operating model, and do operating model change, or is it a conscious decision that companies decide on their operating model, or is it an afterthought? And even in fact, is it important for you to even think about these things?
Yeah, well, it's definitely important to think about those things, right? Because you're buying a business based on the premise of some implicit value it adds to the host business, right? So that could be customers, that could be revenue, that could be
Mm,
technology, that
mm,
could be people, that could
mm,
be an end market that you're not in today. Like, there is a reason that you're buying that company, right?
mm,
And using your operating models, the way I view it on like day one, right? So there's like the there's an evolution of the integration approach or the enterprise architecture, using your terminology, that I think about. Like on day one, it's like you're unifying things like technology, IT, safety and security, Office 365 licenses, hardware, banking institutions, on the finance side, harmonizing P&Ls. Like day one, you are unifying usually finance and IT functions.
and why are you unifying them? Is it like so first of all, when in your M&A strategy, uh you're acquiring like businesses, or
Like
expanding in.
like businesses.
Okay.
But I've
Okay.
I've done the other two, by the way. Okay, but
Okay.
let's stick to like businesses because it's the easiest to articulate for a second,
Okay.
right? And I would argue probably in most M&A, these two things are always going to be common. Here's why: security, AR, IT
Mm,
security, AR, AP, controlling cash flow, understanding net working capital. A lot of times you're buying a business that's cash based and you're moving them to an accrual based business, which means you
mm,
kind of have to have a lockdown on that, right? To a varying
mm,
degree, because you need to create an operating model where you can manage and predict and
mm,
forecast the outcomes of the finances of the business. And on the IT side, frankly, you just want to protect your data and make sure people aren't stealing your customers and walking out the door and
mm,
deleting files and like,
mm,
or introducing external risks with, you
mm,
know, hackers or something like that. So those two things you really like in a very short period of time, you need to like get under control, right?
mm-hmm,
Where the coordination is customers. How do you talk to customers? How do we talk to customers? Is one better than the other, or is there a new version of that we need to harmonize to? Right?
mm,
Those are more an evolution of thought, right?
mm,
With customers, culture of businesses. Um, you know, you guys, what do you do with your team members? What do we do with our team members? Is there one that's better than the other? Can we move
mm,
towards one, or do we need to create something new altogether for both, the consolidated new group, right? To me, that's where the coordination happens, right? Is the people on the customer side, which essentially includes the way you sell, the way you price. A lot of that starts to become a little bit more coordination. Whereas technology
mm.
finance becomes a lot of, unification, right?
Yeah.
Now, over time, what
Mm,
happens is implicitly unification starts to happen more, right? Because as you figure out new best practices and you evolve
mm,
thought, then innately you're starting to unify, right?
hmm,
But it's more natural, not forced into unification.
mm.
Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah. It does make a lot of sense. Um, And when you're talking, because when you're talking unification, and how does it land on the business that you just acquired? Because when you're saying unification, do you also unify the brand, or does the brand still is still up? Does the business still operate under their own brand, and or unification across the board? Everyone is doing the same thing. We're all operating like one company under the same brand, same system, same process, even same T-shirts.
Yeah, I mean, my I say we keep like I'm used to the house of brand strategy, right? We have a parent
Mm,
brand, and we have subsequent, like, I'll call them child brands in the marketplaces, because essentially what's in front of the customer usually is a brand the customer recognizes. And if you're going to go unify the brand, then you have to think about how you're going to invest to do that the right way, to make sure the customer doesn't feel disconnected at some point, right? And what I will say is, unless you're a really big company and you have the structure to do that, it's really hard to have a brand unification process that really
right,
gives you an ROI. I'm just like, I'm being
right,
blunt, because
right.
usually a customer will get left behind, not necessarily on
Mm,
purpose, but in that brand. That's why you see. So let's use a real corporate brand. Like, most people, maybe you know this. Procter and Gamble is a global company,
oh yeah.
right? Underneath them, they have hundreds of brands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of those brands, you could argue, compete with each other, right? But
Mm,
essentially, they have a service for an end market, which is a customer at the end of it. And each customer may have a different need between two different razor brands, right?
mm,
I've known Gillette for many years, but somebody else knows a different brand, right?
mm,
The value of trying to make that all Gillette, as an example, it's really hard to get there, right?
yeah,
To get your consumers to understand and believe in that. So that's why you
right.
don't see a lot. I mean, you do see it, to be fair, but you don't see a lot of it where brands get rolled up into a parent brand. I think
Yeah,
for that to happen, you have to have a very repeatable, tangible product or service that the
yeah,
customers more value the service or product itself, not the
yeah,
brand associated with it.
yeah. And I think when it comes to um, companies like Procter and Gamble, they're more on the diversification side, where there's independence with shared services, right? So you like a family, it's like a holding company, and independent business units. They may share customers, but they don't necessarily share data or integrate. But they have, like, some shared services, but they all run separately. Because when not, but back to your case, Gyner, where you are moving into a more unified model. Because what you're saying, and I maybe get why you move to unified. Does the customer that you serve play a role? Because like for instance, in previous organizations, one of your customers were like big box retail stores,
Yeah.
or like a Walmart, right, who are national. And if they're working with you, they want your brand across all of, servicing all of their stores, right? So in that case, really, the successful completion of one business unit transaction is very dependent on the availability and the accuracy and the timeliness of other business units' data or process or people. Um, does the customer and the type of customer that you serve drive that strategy as well, that integration strategy?
Um, yes, to a degree, right? Yeah, I want to be careful with that, because it's like, hey, the customer is not going to necessarily dictate the brand. The customer's needs are the customer's needs. So
Mm,
Walmart's going to come to you and say, can you fix my HVAC unit?
mm,
And can you fix it in 1,000 stores, right?
mm-hmm,
Mr. Parent Company, I have 1,000 stores. I want you to fix my HVAC units on. The parent company will say, I can do 888 of those 1,000.
mm,
Walmart's needs aren't which brands. Now, there may be a back end office need, like, hey, I want you to go through our portal or something like that, right? You need to report back to the customer, follow a process of work order management that's the same, but you can execute that across multiple brands, right?
mm.
Because their need is, can you hit all my stores the same way? Their need
Right.
is not who are the brands that are doing it,
Right.
right?
And the reason you look at unification in an operating model, because then you need to standardize really the price book, right? You can't charge them one way in California differently than you charge them in Milwaukee, or is that or am I off here?
MSAs have different pricing. If you're talking about service as an example, in
Hmm.
hard products, you're right. There's some level of, the elasticity of prices and it's a lot more rigid, I would say. Someone will pay a little more, but unless you're talking about commodities like food, um, a hard good, a roll of aluminum foil, people like, hey, it shouldn't be that diversified, right?
Mm,
In services, it's different, right? Because by MSA, depending on how you pay
mm,
your employee, the cost of labor of a technician in California is very different than the cost of labor of a technician in Missouri.
mm,
It just is,
mm,
right?
mm,
So hence your price books are different in those states, right?
mm,
So you have to be very observant of that. Now, usually customers understand that, and where the accountability is in the service itself. It's like, hey, I get it. You got to pay a tech $100 an hour here and $80 an hour here, but the work should be the same, right? So it should take them 4 hours in California and 4 hours in Missouri, right?
mm,
Because if the guy in Missouri takes 5 hours, that has nothing to do with how you pay him. That has to do with his competency, and that's where
mm.
the unification comes in, right? The work has to be standard. There should be an operating procedure they're following, or a PM checklist, or a work order management system. All that has to flow the same so that the outputs the customer gets are the same, regardless of what the price book says.
Interesting. And then how do you think about your people organization as you're moving more and more into unification operating model? Like, because you have different business units,
Yeah.
and you have different regions, and you're acquiring companies in all different places. Who do they report to? Does the people, how do you structure the people organization, and you make sure that you're consistent in how you run your operation across all of these regions, even though you're acquiring so many different businesses with so many different systems and process and people? How do you start unifying them, Gyner?
Yeah, I think when you there's got to be like there's a couple different approaches. I'll name a few that I'm familiar with, right? Um, One is by end market, right? So it's like,
Mm,
hey, we have three different product lines, service lines. We're going to align these businesses depending on where their service lies within these product lines, right? Or
mm,
right. So this is a refrigeration outfit. This business, although they do a little hot side as an example, but they're mostly refrigeration, they're going to go into our refrigeration business, right? Um, so there's kind of that end product alignment.
mm,
Most common to begin with, you're going to see is geographic alignment, right? So
mm,
you buy a larger business, and into that business, you kind of roll in smaller businesses, right? So that you
mm.
have some level of geographic alignment within a geography that you define.
So,
So
so you have a layer of executives or VPs at a corporate level running regions,
no,
and
no,
then
the way to think about it is usually you have a shared group of leaders in the business that are across all regions. This
mm,
is your CEO, your COO, your
right.
depending on the type of business, your CTO, your CRO, all your C's. Laugh, chuckle. That's fun. They all.
Global, they're global.
Hey, by the way, they're C's for a reason. They're not A's or B's. They're C's. Um, Joking, a little poking fun at everybody out there, but
Yeah, we're poking
uh,
fun at ourselves, so
yeah, poking a
that's
little
fine.
at ourselves. Um, and then beneath that is kind of the what I'll say the layers of the organization. So here's in the perspective.
Mm,
You buy five businesses. They're in two different MSAs. And when I say MSAs, two big geographic regions, the Northeast and the Southeast of
that's what.
the
Yeah.
US, right? I
Mhm.
just bought five businesses. Two of the businesses of the five are larger than the others. The ones in the Northeast, so then you say, hey, the other three, we're going to roll you into those businesses, and the leaders of those businesses implicitly potentially become the leaders of the overall. right?
Mm.
And because you want to have some harmony of direction so that people aren't stepping on each other, right? Um, so that's kind of the thought. So you got end markets, you have geographic, I guess, unification. Um, I guess at the end of the day, you could also have one based on strategy itself, right?
Mm.
The strategy and what are you trying to get to.
Mm.
You could have a customer level unification that happens just because you get so big with a certain type of customer or a customer where you
Mm.
say, hey, we're going to unify all of our businesses in grocery because that
Mm.
segment is so big for us. We want to make sure that all
Yeah.
those businesses that do work there are aligned.
So when you say we're going to unify our business, are you primarily talking about the delivering of the service, or are you really talking even about the functions? So, like AR,
Functions.
AP,
It could be functions. Because you start to optimize within that then, right? So let's just say if half your business comes from grocery, continue to use that example for us, right? All of a sudden you're saying, if I put APAR or allocate specialists within this part of our business because it's gotten so large, I can drive efficiency because they're repetitive with their processes every day, right?
that's the
Uh,
standardization side, how you're
That's
starting
right.
to standardize.
That's correct. That's
And
correct.
how do you think about it? So let's keep building on this two region model.
Um, I think about it today. So like I have to use mine because as we think about it, we start in regions, and I have we have presidents at the operating level. Usually they come as former owners into the business, right?
And they own the delivery of the service or the product
That's right.
primarily.
On the delivery and the service of the product, right?
Right.
And those presidents are, don't get too tied up in the title, but those
Yeah, yeah.
leaders, they're owners typically that come into your business. They have a level of expertise, right? They know how to talk to customers. They know how to deliver great service or a great product. They have great expertise in that area,
They
right?
report into the CEO or COO or
It
who?
could be either or, right? It
Okay,
depends on the size of the organization.
right,
Typically one or the other though, right? As the organization gets larger, I would argue the COO, just because the
right,
CEO's direct report structure also evolves as that organization gets larger.
right.
But it could be either or, right? In
Yeah,
this
but
example,
they report to a C-suite, either the
they
CEO or
usually,
the COO.
they usually report to a C-suite. In this case, right? When it's business level, that's where it goes. Now, when you get to end markets, you may have, the direction of the revenue growth reports into a CRO or a revenue leader, right?
Mm.
Um, or if you're talking about supply chains, they may go into a real operations leader that just focuses on a specific subset of that business. But
Mm.
like initially, when you're really building platforms, the model is you're buying owners successful with the businesses they all created. The
Mm-hmm.
ones that are the most successful, you help with like continuing to build the revenue of the business or the growth of the business while you start to take off kind of the back office complexities and start to unify that, right?
It's a double click on that a little bit. So
So,
take the back office and so you're keeping the delivery of the service localized or at the regional level, rolling up to a president. So what are you doing with the back office?
so that's where you start to say, hey, your staff accountants don't report to the owner anymore. They report in through the controller of the overall business.
At the corporate layer, in the corporate
At the
layer.
corporate level, or your
Okay.
receiving specialists report into your AR manager, right?
Mm.
Start to move that off, right? You have an MSP who manages all your IT functions. Well, we're going to move to a different MSP who handles corporate wide MSP for all of our businesses, right?
Mm.
Those things start to come away from the owner in
The
transition
non-core,
time
the
because you
non-core.
want the owner to be unlocked to really go do what they're great at, which is grow the heck out of the business, right?
Yes. And what about the go-to-market organization?
Tell me what go-to-market means to you.
Sales, marketing, client success,
They,
account
when
management.
we first start, they report in through the owner still, right? Because you are learning about their business, their customers, their organization, how they sell value, how they sell price. You're really learning initially. And I would say for the good first year, you're learning, right?
Mm.
After that, you can start to understand a little bit better on, hey, their Walmart guy and my Walmart guy, we probably can consolidate them into one Walmart group,
Mm.
right? Uh,
Mm.
the execution of the service can still be by brand, the delivery, but the management of the customer gets unified, right?
Wow.
Um, but that takes time. Like you really have to understand to do that well. You don't just like flip a switch because that breaks stuff, right? This is like where I
Mm.
started. You start leaving customers behind. All of a sudden, you're like, hey, yeah, they got a Walmart guy. We got a Walmart guy. Let's just have one Walmart guy. It's like, yeah, but everybody goes to market a little different.
Mm.
So you got to understand that and make sure the customer's taken care of while you make that transition.
Man, how do you keep track of all of that? How do you onboard people into such a complex model?
Be very open with them that it's a model that's complex first.
Mm.
I think as leaders, we tend to because we're so passionate about the businesses we run, we tend to oversell the work.
Mhm.
Like, and people get in and they're like, oh my gosh, this was what I expected, right? I usually say, look, it's a lot of fun because we're going to make it a lot of fun together, but there's a lot of work here. So you
A lot
understand
of change.
it's great
Very.
because there's also a lot of experiences and output, right?
Mm.
You know, when I first got into private equity,
Mm.
my first 2 years, and if I include COVID as my third year, right?
Mm.
I went through. We had to fully like spin out of business out of corporate America into a standalone business and create a
Okay.
whole bunch of shared service functions. We did 2 acquisitions in the first 18 months. We did a divestiture. We had to sell a business out of the business, right? Which is a carve out of that business, right?
Carve it
And
out
then
of a
when
carve
all
out.
that was done, COVID hit. And
Boom.
then you had to figure out a way to navigate the business through a really challenging environment of, you know, banks and interest rates and everything that was going on. Like to me, the experience I take away from that is invaluable to me as a person. Like
Mm.
I essentially got probably 30 years of experience,
I can
right?
imagine.
So
Yeah.
I will say to people, I'm always open about, hey, as you come into this, I want you to know I can only tell you what I know about the role and how
Mm.
passionate I am about the future of this business. What I can't tell you about and why I won't overcommit to you is you go in there and you find things that I don't know about that we need to improve. And what
Mm.
I expect is the reason I'm hiring you is for you to do that and bring those recommendations forward so we can improve them. Right? You
Interesting.
have to have that conversation.
So what were some of the okay, I didn't know that. Like what were some of the aha moments, or for you it's like okay, you assumed something is will be from an integration and harmonizing you know tens of businesses together. What assumptions did you hold that kind of got shattered or fell apart as you started adding your fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth acquisition to the platform? Were there any like aha moments?
Yeah, I mean, some of the aha moments were like, if you think of like month end close, you start to find out that these owners, because and it's
Huh.
nothing bad. I mean, like they close their books a couple times a year because they had to, but we're trying to close every month so we understand what the revenue is, the
Mm.
profit is, and then you bring in this shared team and they're like, oh my god, these guys have nothing in place to do this, right?
You bring who? The shared team?
So like you bring in your controller or
Okay.
your FP&A lead, and they're like, they're rubbing their eyes and saying, "What did you get me into?" Right?
Oh my God. Yeah. How
Um,
long did it take? How long does it typically take you to get the books properly lined
it
up
takes a couple
to your
months.
process?
It takes a
Yeah.
couple because there's a deficiency of resources, or maybe somebody doesn't understand, or they don't have the right technology tools. You start to kind of figure all that out because we say, "Hey, we want to get all our books closed." My point of view as a CEO is like I'd like all of our books closed within 10 calendar days of the following month. So because of that, what do we need to do to get there, right? So there's an assessment there, right?
Yeah.
The other thing you find out about is paid practice. This is a fun one, right? You say, hey, this guy makes, I'll make up a number, $40,000 a year. But then you find out that the owner is like, yeah, I pay for his family trip once in a while. And,
This
but it's like,
the
what?
side stuff.
Yeah, and it's like, why didn't you tell us all this stuff? Right? We don't have a problem with it. It's like we want to take care of the person, but now like my HR
Yeah.
person is like, oh my gosh, pulling my hair out because I got to
Yeah.
figure all this out, right?
Yeah.
And this, these things don't sound that critical, but when you add them all up, they start to
Yeah.
accumulate.
Absolutely.
And there's a
Yeah.
cumulative impact to people. And by the way, to the people in the business too, because then they fear this change that you can
Mm.
continually bring in, right?
Mm.
So that's why it's like, hey, really understand it. Don't oversell your roles. They're a
Right.
lot of work. They're a lot of great fun. You get a ton of experience. So sell the fun experience, but don't oversell the amount of work because there's real work there.
Right. Right. And so, and now going into another private equity experience, like what are some of the things that you're carrying over with you that you're like, okay, I'll never do that again, or I'll always do this moving forward. What are some of those key lessons learned?
Um, I learned a lot about technology. One of the things I learned is I'm very hesitant to have, technology for me initially as I was learning it was a little bit of a, hey, go blinking objects, right? Oh,
Mm.
this could work really well in the business. This could work really well in the business. And now I'm a little bit more like step back and tell me the problem we're trying to solve,
Mm.
right? What's the
First
problem?
principles.
What's
Yeah.
the problem statement? Well, the problem statement is we have a security lapse. All our people are on Android phones, and we can get hacked. Just making this up, right?
Yeah.
Got it. Let's find a solution for that. I don't really care that 15 security companies are trying to sell me their whiz bang, how they're better than everybody else. Like, here's our problem statement. Let's go find the best suppliers that match our problem statement, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, folks that are like, oh, data and AI, and we've talked about this a little bit. Like, what's your use case for it? Like,
What problem are you solving?
what problem are you really solving, right? Because if you're not really thinking about solving a problem, then you're just doing it. And that was a learning for me, right?
Mm.
Because it was really easy for people to kind of get in my ear and say, hey, I can do this better than the other guy. And,
Mm.
and in my brain, I was like, I didn't do is this really solving the problem for me, right?
Mm.
So that's something I really do a lot of now. Like, hey, what's the problem statement, or what are the problem statements? Because that's
Mm.
more accurate. There's more than one, and then the problem statements become requirements,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And now you can go to a technology company and say, here are the 10 requirements I have to solve what I need in the business, right?
Yeah. It's,
That
it's,
that took me a while to get there, by the way.
it's
Because it's really easy to just go chase that cool new object that's out there, cool new technology.
it's interesting you bring that up. So I'm we're in the process. We did Lean Six Sigma and all of that, and we tried quality and transform and bring in Six Sigma and training 60 plus people certified, but really the habit of scientific thinking was not there to really be able to execute on such a complex methodology. And you realize, even myself, how much I lack scientific thinking and like just good problem solving, because I'm an ideas guy. I'm like, you ask me a question, I can give you 10 answers right now. And we're implementing what's called an improvement kata, or PDCA, plan do check act, the way Toyota did it, Toyota kata. And you learn that like you need to sit with the problem. So I'm doing a pilot, literally I'm just trying to improve how fast we create process documentation.
Right.
I sat with the problem, just trying to understand the cycle. Sat with the problem for 5 weeks, and I was like, let's just let's just do something about it, man. So it's just the patience that you need to sit with the problem, understand, and go observe it. Go to the impact, go observe, go see it.
That's
No,
right.
don't not second hand report or data. Data can only tell you what, doesn't give you the context, doesn't give you the why. And if you're dealing with people, you gotta go see them execute the process, and then you're allowed to come up. You're not allowed to.
Right.
So now the rule in the company, you're not allowed, especially a scene, not allowed to give a recommendation or a solution unless you go and observe the problem firsthand.
Right. And, the magnitude of the problem is important to understand because sometimes
Yeah,
we face problems that aren't big problems, right?
yeah,
If you go and you think you have an invoicing problem, right? And then all of a sudden you find out, oh my gosh, we're messing up pricing on this widget, but you only sell 3 of those widgets in the 1,000 invoices versus, hey, I got this real big problem, which is taxes off on 400 invoices.
mm.
Hey, here's a recommendation: leave the small one alone for now.
Right.
Right,
And there are a lot of fires. You just need to decide on the. There's always too many fires to put out.
right. And
You
just
just
because
need to
it's a
understand what the
problem,
big fires are.
here's what I tell people: just because it is a problem doesn't mean it's a big problem, right?
Or yeah, exactly.
And
Understand
well,
the impact.
this is a okay. How much revenue is that going to cost us?
Right.
Well, it might cost us like one customer a year. Okay. How big is that customer? Oh, like $5,000. Okay.
Yep.
We're not going to spend time on this, guys.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
we need to improve the business where it has the most impact on our people and our customers in mass. And
Yeah.
when we get to a point where we run out of it, then we can be the Toyota of manufacturing, right? Where we're
Right.
like, we really have to helm the Six Sigma to kind of bring it outwards a little bit of the bell curve to really shrink the error rate
Yeah.
because
Exactly.
we're running out of improvement areas, right? But most companies have tons of improvement areas.
Yes, and I think, while we're talking about technology, but it's really about people problem solving, right? Because if all of these problems keep bubbling up to you, it just overwhelms you as
Yeah,
an executive. How do we teach our people? How do we help our people develop problem solving skills so they can like deal with these things at their level and prioritize and really, and bubble up the problems that are worth solving because there's never shortage of problems to solve in our business. So, Gyner, if you want to leave us with a key takeaway for the C-suite out there in terms of how to think, when it comes to operating models, how, what's your, recommendation in terms of how to think about it or, gotchas to keep an eye out for?
well, here's what I'll say. You said, how do we make sure the problems are real problems? Someone taught me the 5 whys a very
Yeah.
long time ago. Now I don't say why all the time, but what I try to get to is like you got to get behind the question that's what's before. Like, hey, this is the invoices have an error rate. Why? Well, because upstream we got these 2 people that are miskeying things. Why? Because the work order that comes in from the technician is faxed in and we can barely read it. Why? Because the technician is still using work orders that are paper.
Notebook.
Right? All of a sudden you go to why,
Right. You
and
get to
you're
the root
like,
cause.
okay, now I can get to almost what the root cause is and
Yes.
decide whether or not I want to address the root cause
Boom.
or say, is there a better spot in this stream where I can make it better? As an example, maybe I don't have them fax it in anymore. Maybe I have them use their phone to take a picture and I get a clear view of their work order. Now they can email, right?
Mm.
So now I've eliminated a little bit of that problem. But maybe I can't go to a fully digital work order right now, which is the root cause problem, right? So I'm trying to make that tangible and say, like, ask questions. Most of us, because we're experts in the space, I always say people, the bias we get as we get more mature in our leadership
Mm.
style is we forget what made us successful early on in our leadership, which is
Curiosity.
curiosity in the questions. Just
Yes.
because you're an expert today doesn't mean you're an expert in this scenario, right?
Right. I
Ask
love that.
a question with the point of either validating your point of view so that you can communicate that back to the team or learning something and using your experience and saying, here's a way we should start to understand this, and then an approach we can take to go find the solution, right?
I love that.
But
So when it comes to operating models, really don't let your previous experience or bias towards how you did it last time, mask the real problem you're trying to solve for in your operating model. Why unification? Why replication? Why diversification? Why coordinate? What problems are you trying to solve?
right.
In your integration, in your M&A, what's the thesis? What problems are you trying to solve? And how do you get there? And stay curious.
Yeah, you are a better expert by staying curious.
Boom. I love that. So that's the takeaway from this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the CO perspective on integration and operating model. It's been, again, a masterclass for me, Gyner. I'm grateful for all the insights you share with us. And I am looking forward to our next episode, which will be our last episode in this season. And I'll tell you more about it, what's coming up next, and what we've got in place for you. So,
Hey,
Gyner, go ahead.
one thing to the audience. You notice that the window behind Yassin went from dark to daytime in this conference call. In our podcast, he went from night to day.
Yes.
So,
You're global. This is a global podcast. That's what it is. So bringing global perspective to local problems. Thank you, Gyner, so much. I appreciate you. And yes, until the next episode, make your days great.
thanks.